How did one guy go from working a minimum wage job to being a full-time real estate investor in just a few years? How did he find financing to buy his properties? And is investing in real estate right for you? We'll answer these questions and more on the 30th episode of the DoughRoller podcast.
Welcome to the DoughRoller podcast, where the best thing money can buy is financial freedom. We help you make more, spend less, and invest the rest. And now your host, Rob Berger.
Whether you're just starting out, buried under a mountain of debt, or well on your way to financial freedom, this is the podcast to help you take your finances to the next level. Welcome to day 23. Let me make sure I've got that right. Yep, 23. It's hard to believe a podcast today for the month of January. This is day 23 in the 31-day money challenge. The goal that I set for this month was just basically to cover a wide range of topics in personal finance and investing, all geared towards one theme, and that is helping you work towards and achieve financial freedom. And of course, everyone, folks are at different places. Some are trying to get out of debt. Heck, some are just trying to find a job. Others are maybe further along, have their debt paid off, or saving for retirement and trying to figure out what the next step is. But my goal was to try to have a little bit of something for everybody. And for those that have been following along, we started all the way at the beginning with what is financial freedom with Jean Chatzky. She was great to come on the show, very popular podcast. And we've talked about budgeting, net worth, how to get out of debt, your credit score, all those topics, all the way through investing, and tried to give you a lot of practical tips and resources and ideas with that. And so we've had a number of days where we've been focusing on investing, an important topic. And I thought what we would do today is bring on a guest. His name is Brandon Turner. He is a real estate investor. He has a fabulous story to tell. I mean, this is a guy that went from making minimum wage to a full-time real estate investor in just a few years. It took him a lot of work. Had some setbacks along the way, as you'll hear about and you would expect. But he has done very well for himself. He now works at biggerpockets.com. So Bigger Pockets is a website that is, I think, probably the single best resource on the internet for those wanting to invest in real estate. Josh, the owner of that site, I've known Joshua for a long time now, and we meet at conferences every year. And so Brandon works for biggerpockets.com. And is a real estate investor and just has a great story. So I reached out to him to see if he would come on the show, and he agreed to. So this is actually a fairly long interview. It's packed full of tips, his story, what he went through, his successes, his setbacks, how he gets financing, where he finds his tenants, what kind of properties he buys, everything. And I think you'll find this, even if maybe real estate investing is not what you want to do right now, or maybe ever, I still think this is a great podcast and that you can get a lot out of it, because it really shows you what you can accomplish if you have the courage to take that first step and work hard. This is a story of someone who really started from square one and has done a great job of building a portfolio of real estate. And you'll hear about it, including one of his more recent purchases, an apartment building. So this is going to be interesting. Let me first say thank you to our sponsors, and then we'll get to the interview. Our first sponsor is Betterment. They're an online platform that invests your money for you in both stock and bond ETFs. You just select the percentage you want of each. Betterment does the rest. They also rebalance your investments, and they reinvest your dividends automatically. I've used Betterment for a number of years now and have been very happy. You can check them out at betterment.com. And our second sponsor, Personal Capital. It's a free online tool that helps you track all of your investments across all of your accounts, taxable and retirement, including 401ks, IRAs, everything. It's very easy to set up. They will show you your performance every day. They'll show you your asset allocation across all your accounts, as well as the fees that you're paying for all of your investments. You can check them out at personalcapital.com. So with that, I want to get right to the interview. Hey, Brandon, welcome to the show.
Hey, Rob. Thanks for having me. This is great.
Hey, I appreciate you coming on the show. As you know, this is part of a 31-day money challenge that I'm recording. I'm doing a podcast every day for the month of January, which is a little insane, but I'm trying to keep my head above water. And we've talked a lot about sort of the basics of personal finance, budgeting, getting out of debt, investing, all very important topics. But I also thought it was important to give folks a perspective on how they can make some extra income, even while they're perhaps working a full-time job. I know you through Bigger Pockets,
Yep.
and Josh over there. I've known Josh for a number of years, and I know that you invest in real estate. So I wanted to just sort of pick your brain for the benefit of the listeners and have you share your story and kind of where you've come from and how you got involved in investing and how things stand now. So that's kind of what I want to do. I guess to get started, could you just give us a little bit of your background and how you came to start investing in real estate?
Sure. Well, it was a blistery day back in 1985, and I was born. No, just kidding. I'll fast forward a little bit.
Wait a minute. You were born in 1985?
1985.
That's the year I graduated from high school. Oh, man.
Wow, that's funny. Yeah, 1985 is when I was born, and I started investing actually in real estate kind of as an accident. I got out of college. I got done with college and looking for a house to rent. And I had a friend who was a real estate agent said, hey, why don't you just buy a house that's actually cheaper? So I looked into it, and this was the height of the market. But still, I found I didn't know anything about real estate, but I knew, buy something cheap. So I went and looked for kind of the cheapest house I could find. And I got lucky, and I found a nice house built in the late 70s. And it's just ugly. I mean, really ugly. And back then, they were giving mortgages to anyone. I mean, like if you had two eyes and a mouth, like they were throwing money at you. And so I got a mortgage. I think I got 100% financing on that first deal, where the bank funded the whole 100% of the purchase. Yeah.
Now,
go ahead.
I'll say, what year was this?
This would have been 2006 or early 2007. Okay. I think it was that winter. And so the market crashed at the end of 2007. But this is 9 months before that probably. I bought the house and I had no money. I mean, I had no money. I was working, I think I was making $9 an hour working overnights at a group home for developmentally disabled adults. And so I had nothing saved, no money, which I don't usually recommend people doing, is jumping into a house when you have nothing. But I didn't know anything what I was doing back then. So borrowed money actually from my dad. I called him up and said, so I called him up and asked him if I could, borrow some money to fix this house up. And he said, sure, as long as you pay it back. So I think I borrowed $5,000 or something like that. And I went to Home Depot. I bought the 1, 2, 3 Home Improvement book, it was called.
I've seen that one.
Orange, a little orange book. I think half of America has it in their garage somewhere. And I had never swung a hammer in my life before that point, but I kind of learned how to remodel it. I feel really bad for the people who live in that house right now. Oh boy, I don't know what I was doing on a lot of those things, but I ended up, paint, carpet, new flooring.
And did you do all that yourself?
I did, yeah. Me and my wife to be, we weren't married quite yet, but I lived with her brother at the time. So kind of the three of us, nights and weekends or whenever we could, we'd work on fixing the place up. So then I actually sold the house. I mean, that summer, I should say, before I sold it. That summer, I had all of a sudden this idea. I wanted to go to Europe. I don't know, but somehow I read something. I was like, I want to go backpack Europe for a year. That sounds amazing. So I was like, well, how can I afford that? I thought I could sell my house. So I put it on the market. I had bought it for $80,000. I put 5 or 10 into it maybe by the time I was done, and we listed it at $140 and ended up selling it. Yeah.
You sold it the same year you bought it?
I did. Yeah.
Wow.
So I sold the same year I bought it, which presents some tax issues. Like you have to pay taxes on that money when you don't own a house for 2 years and you sell it. But I ended up clearing, by the time I was all finished with it, I ended up clearing and paying all the real estate fees and everything, about $25,000 or so. But instead of going to Europe, I ended up just I had proposed to my girlfriend, and we used the entire chunk for a wedding. So I didn't get Europe at that point, but I did get a dream wedding. So that was my intro into kind of real estate.
Right. Hopefully, you got something better than Europe, right?
Yes,
right.
Much better than Europe.
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
Honey, much better. Hopefully, she's not listening. So that was it. And then right after that, we needed a place to live, obviously, and so we began looking. Oh, by the way, so that house sold September. We got the offer September of 2007. It closed on Halloween of 2007, and for those who remember, that was the month. It was that September and October when the market just went over the edge. Mm-hmm. And I remember sitting in the house as we were waiting for the deal to close, and every day the stock market was worse and the real estate market was worse, and things were just going. I mean, I got out of that thing just barely okay. I mean, it sold, and today that house would be probably worth I don't know, 110.
Wow.
You know, so I feel a little bad for the people who bought it, and I guess I was part of that problem of the rising of the market. But I got lucky. I mean, I got really lucky.
Right.
Granted, my whole payment on that thing was I think $600 a month, and it would have rented for $800 and $900. So I would have been okay had I kept it, but I wouldn't have had the dream wedding. So.
Right. Okay, so that was your first foray into real estate.
Yeah,
and it was a profitable one, but short term.
It was, yes. Which, you know, flipping is fun. You see that on TV all the time, right? You know, people who buy and fix up and sell. But at the end of the day, when you're done with that, like, what did I have to show for? I mean, I had a wedding. It was great, but it was just a job. When I stopped flipping that house, there was no more money coming in.
Yeah, that's my sister and I flipped a house this year in Ohio, and it didn't make as much as your flip did. Our timing wasn't quite as good, but I mean, it made some money. But to your point, you know, it's not like it's a steady stream of income. You flip it, you make a little bit of money, and then if you want to keep going, you just got to do it all over again. Yeah, and the tax hit is pretty rough because you don't get long-term capital gains. So
exactly, yeah.
So
it could be harsh.
Yeah. Okay, so you make some money on your first property in just a matter of months, really. You get married. So what's the next step in your real estate adventure?
Sure. This is actually kind of a fun story. So we needed a place to live, so we started looking, trying to buy something. We thought, me and my wife were both working, again, pretty much minimum wage jobs. She was at Starbucks, and I was at that same group home, I think, at the time. And so right before that, when that house was selling, like during the process, I told my dad, I said, I'm going to get into real estate investing as a career. This is what I want to do for a living, you know. And I kind of expected a little bit of, you know, I don't think that's a good idea. But instead, I mean, I got a flat out, you're going to go broke. Your tenant, you know, you're going to lose your everything. You're going to go broke, because my dad had never heard of a successful real estate investor, and he thought it was all scammy. And you know, they told me basically I was ruining my life and that I need to, you know, get my head on straight and go to law school or something. At the time, I was studying for law school, so I don't know. I didn't listen. I ended up actually Googling. I think that was actually how I found Bigger Pockets originally, where that's who I actually, you know, I work for now. That's how I originally found them, was I Googled what to do if tenants don't pay. I told them I wanted to go into it. I didn't know what that was. So I Googled it, came across this site, Bigger Pockets, and joined. And so I've been on there for, I don't know, what's that, 6 years now or something.
So your dad didn't want you to pursue a career in real estate.
Yeah, I mean, he still gives me a hard time. To this day, he tells me I should have gone to law school. Well, and I'm like, I don't know.
Was it hard for you to, I guess, not take his advice? Was that a difficult choice?
It was, yeah. I mean, because it was almost like a disappointment, because I guess my parents, I think, saw me as kind of like I had so much potential, and I was going to go, you know, they used to brag about me studying for law school. So like they had a lot of potential in that I was going to be the son who's a lawyer and making all this money. And they were raised in a generation where very much of that, you know, you work 40, 50 years, you save a little bit every month, and at the end of it, you get your retirement from your company, and that's your life. And I think the world's changed quite a bit since that. I mean, my dad will retire just fine with his pension from his job he's been at for 40 years. But I don't know, that's not as common anymore. Mm-hmm. I mean, people leave jobs way too often. There's less and less security in those things. And I think there is an importance of stepping outside and trying to make a future for yourself outside of your job.
Well, do you remember the day you said you were studying for the law school, the LSAT?
Yep.
And I'm a lawyer, so this is near and dear to my heart. But do you remember the day when you finally, you know, your dad's telling you what he thinks, you're studying for the LSAT, you want to go into real estate. Do you remember the day when you just finally decided, that's it, I am officially not going to law school? This is my decision.
I remember it only because it was that day I told my dad. I mean, I didn't really ask their advice as much as I did, you know, told them, hey, I'm not going. And so that was the day I was told, you're going to ruin your life. You need to rethink this decision. And even then, I mean, I quit my job at that point and decided to do it full time. I thought we could live on one income of my wife's, even though she was just making, you know, whatever, $8-9 an hour at Starbucks.
So you were all in. I mean, you jumped into the deep end of the pool.
Yeah, I decided this is what I'm going to do, and you know, here we go. So
and would this have been like, this was after you sold the first home?
Correct. So, yeah, this was like during that transition time when the first one was selling is when this conversation took place.
Well, before we get to your next property, I'll just say this in case your dad's listening to this podcast. You know, I went to law school. I graduated in, let's see, you were 7. when I graduated from law school. And, I've been in the practice of law for over 20 years in Washington, D.C. I can tell you that going to law school in 2008 would not have been a wise move. That's not to say you couldn't have made it work. But starting in 2008, the legal market, particularly at large firms, has just gone through a dramatic transformation, and not for the better. And I've seen a lot of highly educated, talented, experienced lawyers effectively have to go retool and find a different career. The legal market it was brutal in 2008, and it's still not recovered. And in fact, law school applications today are down. So you can tell your dad, if he doesn't listen to this, you made the right decision.
I'll let him know.
Yeah. Anyway, okay. So you decide not to go to law school, and so you're going to go. So you quit your job to do real estate. And were you going to be a real estate agent or just an investor?
Just an investor. I didn't ever want to be an agent. I mean, there's a sob story right there. I've actually taken the class to become an agent twice now and never actually took the test. Even though I took the whole class, I just at the end something else came up and never got my license to be an agent. But I don't know. I don't really regret it too much now. But so I wanted to be an investor. I was going to be a flipper. I was watching those TV shows where they were flipping houses, and I had a successful flip under my belt, and I thought this was great. But my actual next real estate deal wasn't a flip. I needed a place to live, and there was a duplex that came up on the market, and it was 2 houses on 1 lot, and the whole thing they were asking $80,000 for it, and it was pretty run down, but not terrible. Just really ugly. Just really cosmetically ugly. It needed a few $1,000s worth of work, but it wasn't terrible. But everyone had passed on it. It had been on the market for a long time. And again, the market was right in free fall at this point. This is, fall of 2007. And we ended up, and this is, I guess, this is before the mortgages completely fell out. So we were able to get a mortgage on that property. My wife, she did it in her name since I didn't have a job. And we were able to move in. And I think our payment is, including taxes, insurance, taxes, insurance, and flood insurance, because technically it's in a floodplain because my whole county is in one, which is a whole different story. But total payment is around $600 a month.
And this is in the state of Washington?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
Now, I live in kind of a weird area where our prices are really cheap compared to a lot. So a lot of people hearing this are going to think this is ridiculous, but add a zero and the numbers all make sense. I mean, some places you can have a $6,000 a month mortgage payment, but your rent's going to be $8,000 or $9,000. So whenever I'm using numbers like this, you can add zeros and commas all you want, and it's percentages that matter, I think.
Okay. But, so this was a duplex. So you were going to live in one side and rent the other side out?
Yep. So that's what we did. We moved in, we painted it. My wife and I lived in a little 1-bedroom house in the back. And the 2-bedroom house up front, we rented out to a buddy of mine, which tip of the day, never rent to a buddy of yours. He ended up getting hauled off to prison in the middle of that ordeal after a lot of other drama. But
so that's your first tenant nightmare story for us.
Yeah, my first tenant nightmare story definitely is do never, ever rent to family and friends. Now, that's a lesson I learned probably a dozen times. And every time probably. You think you would learn eventually, but I never learned. And I mean, like, I'm pretty adamant about it now. I don't let anybody in that I know whatsoever. But family and friends make the worst tenants because nobody likes their landlord. So every one of those relationships ended up with 2 possible scenarios. It was either I get screwed or I lose the relationship. Yeah. And so every time I generally chose just to get screwed over. I mean, it just happened time and time and time again. And I don't know how much money I've lost over the years from renting to family and friends, but it's been terrible. But anyway, I learned my lesson. A fun story about that duplex, though. The later tenants, after that guy got hauled off to prison and left, I had some tenants in there, and they called me and said, there's flashes of light in our window. Like every so often, there's like pictures being taken of our house. And I assumed the county was, doing some kind of appraisal thing or something going on, and didn't really think much of it. And then, a year later, I'm talking to the same tenants, and they mentioned again, yeah, it happens at least a couple times a week. There's a flash in our windows. And then I don't know, whenever it was, the tenants finally figured it out, and they told me, they said, yeah, some Swedish tourists came and knocked on our door, and they wanted to get a tour of the Cobain house. So apparently this was the house Kurt Cobain was born in.
Sweet.
Or he's born in the hospital, but this is his first home. And apparently Kurt Cobain, he's big in America, but he's huge overseas in a lot of areas. So yeah, so I guess I later found out his parents lived in both houses, the front and the back. They had moved when he was 6 months old from one to the other. So I guess I can claim that's my claim to fame, is I own 2 of Kurt Cobain's homes.
You've got an historic landmark on your hands.
I do have a historic landmark. Yeah.
I'm curious, what could you? I guess after your friend got hauled off to jail and you got a real tenant in there, you said you were paying $600 a month, I think, in mortgage.
Yep.
What kind of rent were you getting from the side you're renting?
Sure. The front house was renting for $650 a month, and then the back one, obviously, I was living pretty much for free.
Wow, that's terrific.
Yeah. I mean, I had to pay my own water, sewer, garbage for the whole thing. So I was, it was costing me a couple $100 a month to live there.
Yeah.
But it wasn't too terrible. I mean, being able to live almost for free was kind of, and the reason we decided that is because we knew we wanted to get into house flipping. We knew that when you flip houses, you don't make money every month. You make it at one big chunk of a time. And so we thought a duplex kind of living for free would be the ideal way. And I tell everyone young especially, that to consider a duplex. Yeah. I really think it's probably the smartest investment I ever made of anything. I mean, that if you can buy smart. Now, a lot of duplexes, they're overpriced and you can't do that. But if you can find a duplex, a triplex, or a fourplex, the residential lending laws cover those. So if you go to a bank doesn't look at a fourplex any different than a single family house. You qualify the same way, but you can sometimes live for free, or you can actually make money to live in a house. And it's good training too. Just if you want to ever get into real estate investing, it's the world's best training, just hands-on, on-the-job training. Do
you still own that duplex?
I do, yeah.
But I take it you've moved out?
Yes, I've moved out. We've had, after we moved out, a little old lady moved in, and she's been there now for 5 years, I think, and she pays on time every month. So now it's just pure cash flow. I mean, after paying the water, sewer, garbage, and the occasional maintenance, we still clear right around $300 a month total on that, sometimes $400.
And you still have the mortgage on it? Correct.
Yeah, we still have the mortgage on it. We pay every month, and I go back and forth on paying that off. Do I want to pay that off and gain the extra? I don't know what it is. I think the interest on that is maybe $300 a month or something like that. I would gain that by paying it off. Yeah, I don't know if it's worth it or not. I go back and forth.
Yeah, my business partner and I go back and forth on that issue too, because do we want to pay off one of the properties or not? We invest in an area that, like yours, is not that expensive. Mm-hmm. The flip that I did with my sister, we paid $45,000 for a 3-bedroom home.
Nice.
And then put 20 or 25 into it. But that's always a tough thing. But the interest rates are so low, it's hard for me to just. Of course, what do you do with your cash then? It sits in a bank account and makes even less. But I mean, it seems it's kind of hard to justify putting a lot of cash down when you've got such a low rate on a mortgage.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm sitting at 4% or something. It's like, that's hard. It's hard to do that when I know I could use the money to go buy other cash flow properties that will, give me a 10, 15, 20, 30% return on investment. Right. How do you justify paying off a 4% mortgage?
Right,
I don't know.
Okay, so you bought the duplex. You lived in it for a while you rented out the front.
Yep.
And that did well for you. Basically, almost rent free. You had some utilities to pay.
Yeah.
What was next for you?
Next, we moved a block away, and then we moved a block away again. We just bought, we'd go walks on the evening. We'd find houses that were cheap, foreclosures. And, I told you that first flip made $25,000. We then flipped probably 7 or 8 homes over the next few years, and none of them ever did what the first one did, because we were always flipping in a bad market. I mean, our market got hit pretty hard, just like a lot of places did. And we never repeated that again. We never repeated that first success. I mean, we sold a few, but we never repeated a $25,000 flip. And I kind of decided that flipping just was not the answer for me. And for a lot of people in a lot of areas, flipping is wonderful. But in my area, I just learned that landlording and being a buy and hold investor was so much better. And over the years, I've kind of developed the buy and hold thing much better, where we'd buy houses to flip, and then we're like halfway through it, it's like, you know what? We could actually get a lot more rent out of this thing. I could maybe make 10 or 15,000, or I could make 500 a month. And what would you rather have? I mean, a lot of people would probably choose the 10 or 15,000, but I would rather choose the several hundred a month for the next 30 years, and then it goes up from there.
Right. Well, so what was the next home or property that you purchased that you kept as a rental?
Sure. So the next one, it was a block away, and it was a little 2-bedroom, 1-bath house with a 2-bedroom, 1-bath garage apartment. So it was also kind of a duplex. And that was one of those cases where we rented it out to the back. We're like, hey, we'll rent it out to family. And ended up renting it out to a family member and then 2 friends of mine. And I'm going to sound like I have just terrible friends, but 2 of those friends ended up getting hauled off to jail at some point during that as well. I don't know. I guess I associate with bad people or something, but they, trashed the place, just destroyed a lot of it. So I ended up kicking everyone out and turning it into a single house because they were close enough. It was a garage apartment. I just put a hallway in between. I reframed it all up and I turned it into an actual. Now it's a 3-bedroom, 1-bath because one of the rooms is gone, and I actually call that my like hell house because it's the one house. I bought it for $45,000, but I ended up dropping almost $40,000 into it by the time I was finished. Yeah, so I got 85 into it. I think my mortgage is 85 right now.
Okay, well let's back up for a second.
Sure.
So first of all, when you bought the house, you said you spent $45,000. Were you able to get 100% financing?
Oh, actually, yeah, this is a good place to talk about this. So what I used was hard money on that one. Hard money is a term that scares a lot of people, and rightly so. There's a time and place for it. Basically, what hard money is private lenders who maybe a business or maybe just a wealthier person who has money and they want to lend it out. So this lender I got connected with, and I did a few different flips during this time with him. He lent out the full purchase price and the full cost of repairs. He would lend the entire chunk, but he would charge me a 10% fee on top of whatever the amount I borrowed was. So I think I borrowed $60 on that $40,000 house, and I came up with the rest just on like credit cards, which is a whole different story, which is a bad idea. Okay. But yeah, so I borrowed I think $60,000. He would tack on 10% onto that, so it would be $6,000 more. So now my mortgage was for $66,000, and then I would pay a 10% interest rate on that.
Wow, that's expensive.
Yeah. So and it was for a 2-year loan, and after 2 years he could he would foreclose. You had 2 years to pay it off, and that was it. So you can see how quickly this can add up. Total cost of that money over 2 years is well over $10,000 just to borrow this money.
How'd you sleep at night?
Oh, it was terrible. So the payment alone was ridiculous.
Well, you got 2 years to get this thing figured out, and you said you're hitting your credit cards for the rest of the money. Yep. I don't know. I wouldn't have been able to sleep at night.
I did not sleep at night. The best ideas I've ever come up with in life have happened at about 4 a.m. when I can't sleep. I have to be careful when I tell my story because I don't recommend that people do what I did. It got me to where I am, and I'm happy with it. But borrowing $60,000 on hard money and another $20,000 on credit cards was dangerous. And what it did, it forced me to get a job. At that time, I told you I quit my job. Well, at that point, I'm like, I couldn't sleep at night. I'm like, this isn't going to sell. This has gotten too expensive. The market's dropped considerably. I had thought it would sell for 110, 120, and I was looking at like 70, and I had almost 80 into it. There was no way I was getting out of this thing without losing a ton of money. And I moved in anyway because that was during that. That's why I moved into it because I thought, well, I'm not going to flip it anymore. I might as well move into it and try to refinance it. So I ended up getting a job at a bank, working as a banker. Which was a terrible job, but it got me a mortgage. It got me a couple of different mortgages on some of the flips that I was working on.
Right.
So, yeah, sometimes you got to do what you got to do to get out of those messes.
You basically had 2 years to have the financial wherewithal to refinance the property.
Yep.
And I take it you were able to do that by getting the job and.
Yep, I was able to refinance it. I had to kind of go through like their creative lending department. Like it wasn't even it was basically subprime. And I have even to this day, I still own that property. I have a 7.5% interest rate on it on an $85,000 mortgage. So my payment is like $750 a month, and I only rent the property out for $750 a month.
So it's break even.
It sounds like it's break even, but I have a vacancy at least once a year. Yeah. I have bad luck with that. Every real estate investor who has a lot of property has one property that they have the worst luck with. And I don't know what it is, but this is my, like I said, hell property that I have a new tenant every year. Every one of them tends to trash it. Every one of them, I've had to pay people to leave. I don't like doing evictions if I don't have to. I'm a big advocate of paying people to leave. And even though that's shocking to pride, because I want to, these people are screwing me over and they're stealing from me and costing me money. Why would I give them money to leave? But I know that it's cheaper than paying a lawyer.
Right.
Is what it comes down to.
Yeah. One thing we try to do is we try to get folks to sign longer term leases. Mm-hmm. And so we'll lower the rent. Like, our properties tend to rent for anywhere from $8.95 to maybe $11.45. Mm-hmm. So, on an $8.95 property, we'll say, well, look, we'll give it to you for $8.95 if you do a 2-year lease. But if you want to do a 1-year lease, that's fine, but it's going to be $9.45. And we've had a lot of success with that, and we lock the rate in, so people are happy with it because they know their rent's not going to go up.
Yeah.
Anyway, just
I love that idea. You know, we actually started out. I read it in a book one time. I'm a huge reader. During that time when I was getting into this, I read over 100 books from my local library on real estate. I think I've read every real estate book probably ever put out, and I'm really obsessed about that. So I read one of this book. He said, don't do long-term leases. Do 1 month leases only. Month to month is because then it gives you the right to tell people to leave when you want. And I've always subscribed to that theory, though I am changing that right now. In the past, my theory was always this. If I have a tenant that is there, I'm obligated to obey the lease as a landlord because the law is, very clear on what I can and cannot do. But a tenant doesn't care about a lease. They're going to leave when they want. They're going to trash it if they want. And yes, I could go after them, but these are low-income tenants. I mean, I'm not renting to really high-income people. I'm not going to find them again after they move out in the middle of the night. So I've always done month to month, though I am changing to exactly your strategy, just because I want to test that out. I want to try it out and see if I can get some better longer term people.
Yeah, we've been investing since 2005. We've not had to evict anyone.
Yeah.
Now, the day could come for sure. And we just find that it's, the one thing that I think new investors tend to underestimate is the cost of vacancy. Yeah. And it's not just the month or two in rent that you might lose, but it's also the money you've got to put into the house to repaint it and clean the carpets and whatever. And that's just a huge expense that can easily zap your profits for an entire year or more for a property.
Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah. So
I wrote a post just a couple of days ago called "The 2 Most Painful Words a Landlord Will Ever Hear," and that's what the words were. I'm moving.
Okay.
It's because people think that it's people think it's a lot of things. Like evictions would be the most expensive cost. Not even. Hands down, vacancy is the most expensive cost a landlord will have.
If you shoot me the URL to that, I'll include it in the show notes.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, before we go to your next property. One question that I know folks have is, how do you get your tenants? Do you advertise online? Do you put a sign in the yard? What have you found for your area to be the best way to get good tenants?
Sure. Well, I'll preface it with this, that it's really, you have to test your market because every market is different, obviously. So what I do, I find that Craigslist works hands down the best. And that's great because it's also the cheapest, right? I mean, Craigslist is free. They recently changed some stuff, so you can't make your flyers look quite as pretty, and you can't put internal links. But Craigslist still works real well for trying to find tenants. And but I do the newspaper also, though our newspaper is pretty expensive, as most of them are.
Right.
I'll usually do Craigslist. If I know a vacancy is coming, if today's, let's say January 1st, I know somebody's going to be leaving February 1st, I'll run a Craigslist ad for 3 weeks. If I don't hear anything then I'll run both Craigslist and the newspaper for the last week.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then once you get applicants,
Yep.
I take it you have some form that they fill out, an application?
I do. I'm a huge systems guy. I think that, I would say that 99% of problems that landlords have, including myself, are from the landlord's fault. So any horror stories you ever hear about landlording, generally they're the fault of the landlord, and I'm completely included in that. And so by taking out the emotion from the whole process and just having a step-by-step system, you eliminate a lot of those problems. So yeah, the very first thing, I have a 2-page application. It's front and back, and it's got all the basic information, and I make them fill that out in full. There's questions like, have you ever had an eviction filed against you? Not just have you ever been evicted, but have you ever had an eviction filed against you? I think that's a interesting question. How many pets do you have? I love that question. How many pets do you have? Not do you have any pets? Because people tend to lie when it's a yes or no question. When you ask how many they have, they write 2. And then you ask what they are, it's a fish and a dog. Oh, you have a dog? Well, we need to talk about that. So I have a very, very, thorough application. I run a background check on every single person. Our local landlord association will run them. I think it cost me $15. I use a company called My Smart Move. We use them as well to do credit checks and stuff. I don't always do credit checks, especially on low-income tenants, because I know they all have bad credit. But
Right.
on our nicer houses, we'll do a credit check. And they fill out the application. If it's not out in full, I'll send it back to them and make them fill it out in full. The application's a really good way to see kind of what kind of tenant they're going to be too, I feel like. Some people write down their name and that's it. And they just draw a line through the rest of it. Mm-hmm. I'm like, well, if you don't even want to take the time to fill out this application, then I'm not going to take the time to even try to process it. So
right. You mentioned My Smart Move. Is that local to your area, or can anyone in the U.S. use that service?
Anyone can actually use that. Yeah.
Okay.
They're I think they're run by Experian. If I think so. Yeah, I think they're run by Experian, and it's an interesting kind of process. It's a little bit cumbersome, and again, I only do this for a little bit higher, quality tenants, because they have to actually log onto the website, and they get their own credit report, and then they give you access to it. And so it's kind of a roundabout way of you doing a credit report without being licensed and having all the qualifications that you have to run credit now. And it works really well. I mean, it only takes maybe, I think, a half hour to get the report back.
Okay.
They log on, they do it, they send it over to you, and it's done. So a pretty easy process.
All right, I'll link to that in the show notes. How do you collect rent?
So I've always done, I don't take cash, period. I mean, I have one tenant. The way you set this up in the beginning is the way that tenants will always do it generally. So I have one tenant, my first sort of rental. They, the longest tenants I have, they still pay cash. But everyone else, money order, and I have them all mail it to me. So they mail it directly to my P.O. box. Though I am going to be changing that as well. There's two things I want to try. Automatic withdrawals from bank accounts. I know companies like Appfolio will do that. And I mean, there's a lot of them. Spark Rent is another one that will actually, I think Spark Rent is $1. It costs you $1 to have the money automatically debited from a checking account. Okay. That sounds pretty good. And then there's a new service called Pay Near Me. I did a review on that on Bigger Pockets a little while ago. And that's kind of a cool thing where when you're dealing with lower income tenants who don't have checking accounts, I mean, how do you normally what we do? And a lot of our tenants don't have checking accounts because they're either, I don't know, just a lot of low income people just do not have checking accounts. It blows my mind. But so they do everything in money order, and then they got to mail it to me. Then it might get lost in the mail. And every month I get something lost in the mail. It's crazy. I don't know if I just have a bad mail service out here or what. But so what Pay Near Me does is they enable you to go to any 7-Eleven or Cash Express, I think it's called. It's like a check cashing place. I mean, you can go to any of those places, and for $4 your tenant can pay you directly at a 7-Eleven or one of these places. They get a little barcode that everyone gets, and they walk up there and they scan it either on their cell phone or on a little piece of paper you give them, and it costs them $4 to do it, but then the money is directly deposited into your checking account as a landlord.
Right.
So that's kind of neat. I'm testing that out. I haven't actually done it yet, but I'm hoping to do that February 1st.
Yeah, I cringe when there's so many people that, I just take a checking account for granted.
I know.
And there are so many people. I mean, the number of unbanked and underbanked, that's what the industry calls them, is really mind-boggling to me.
Yep.
And something that I've actually tried to address on DoughRoller by talking about the importance of a checking account, how easy it is to get. Now, there are some people that can't get one because they're in what's called the check system if they've had problems with past banking relationships. But when you start to work as a landlord, you see this, like you've said, you see it in a way that most people probably don't.
Yeah.
And anyway, okay. Well, yeah, I'll definitely link to those. And if you have reviews of any of these, like you mentioned, you reviewed Pay Near Me, shoot that link over to me. I'd be happy to include it so folks can check that out. Cool. Let me kind of fast forward a little bit.
Sure.
Where are you today? How many properties do you own? What kind of properties are they? And, kind of tell us where things stand for you now.
Sure. So today I have 42 units total. Not properties, but 42 units because they're made up. I kind of shifted away from the single family houses. I love that duplex. Somebody asked me, here's a good tip. Somebody asked me, what's working for you right now, Brandon, and what isn't? And I sat back when they asked me that, and I thought, interesting question. And I thought, my best property is that duplex. It gives me cash flow every month. My worst property is that single family house. That should tell me something. And so after that, I kind of started looking at multifamilies more and more. And I bought another duplex, I bought a triplex, I bought a fourplex, and then somewhere in that mix, I bought a 24-unit apartment complex.
Wow!
So that's kind of the big baby, I guess. And that's a story in itself. If you want to go into that, we can. The apartment complex is that got me out of a job and then got me back into a job again, sort of in a roundabout way.
How so?
Well, I mean, so at the time when we got the apartment. Let me actually back up a little bit. So people a lot of times ask, first of all, how do you get into real estate investing if you don't have a lot of money? I mean, to this point, I never had a lot of money. I still don't have a lot of money. I've never had a lot of money. And so I've never actually put down any money of my own in any of these properties I've ever bought. And I think last week I closed on a property, and it was the first time I've ever actually came to closing with my own cash. And I'll get into later maybe why that is. But I mean, some of the strategies that I've used. But I guess what happened is I read a book on buying apartment complexes. It was called The ABCs of Real Estate Investing by Ken McElroy. It's part of the Rich Dad Poor Dad series, and he's got a sequel to that called The Advanced Guide to Real Estate Investing. Two of my favorite real estate books. I mean, I've got a lot of favorites, but I love those two.
What was the author's name again?
Yeah, Ken McElroy.
Okay.
McElroy. Yeah, excellent books, and they're all about apartment complexes and buying them. And he's an apartment complex buyer, and it's all about buying them, finding them, cheap enough, improving them, and then either refinancing or selling or whatever. I mean, just fascinating stuff. And I read this book. I actually think I read both of them on a Saturday, and I just nonstop read through both of them. I thought they were amazing. And I was like, that's what I'm going to do with my life. I want to be an apartment complex investor. This sounds great. And so the next morning, on a Sunday morning, I'm at church, and I'm talking to this old guy who's there. And I had known him for years seen him around. He'd even helped me paint the outside of my house one time. And so I just mentioned to him, I read this book yesterday. It was on buying apartment complexes. I would love to do that. So here's my tip is if you want to get into this, let everyone know. Because here's what this guy says. He's like, that's really interesting because I have an apartment complex that I'm looking to sell. And it was like, what? Like, this is amazing. So
what are the odds?
What are the odds? This is awesome. And so, I mean, it's kind of like, there's that phrase, that popular quote, I don't know who originally said it, but the harder I work, the harder I work, the luckier I get.
Right.
Yeah. And so, he wasn't the only guy I told about this apartment thing, but that was all I was talking about because I was so I was obsessed with this idea. And it just so worked out that he had one that he wanted to sell. He actually had sold it 10 years earlier to a guy, sold it for $550,000 to this guy. The guy ended up having another business, like a gas station, who it was going under. So he was losing money. So he was taking all the money from the apartment, putting it into the gas station, ended up losing both. And this older couple who had sold it to him, they had carried the mortgage on it, which means that they were acting as the bank because they owned it free and clear.
Right.
So they ended up taking it back from this guy in a foreclosure because he stopped paying the rent or the mortgage on it. And the thing had not had any maintenance done to it in about 3 years while this guy through this whole process. I mean, every time a unit of these 24, every time a unit got vacant, he would just leave it. And so it went from 24 down to, I think, 11 or 12 that were actually rented out.
Wow.
Yeah, the other ones were all just mostly trash. Everyone needed to be redone. And, one of the roofs was bad. There was problems with it. Now, this older couple, they were retired. Like that was their retirement, was this income. So it worked out a really nice win-win-win in that we agreed. It took a year of actual conversation for this whole thing to take place, but we agreed that they would sell it to us for the same price they sold it to him, 10 years earlier for $550,000. And instead of a down payment, my job would be to remodel the place. I would personally be in charge of paying for the repairs and doing that. And so, we did it. We went through the whole process. We ended up buying it. That was, I think, 4 years ago now is when we actually closed on it. Might have been 3 years ago. Yeah, it's time. It's a funny thing. So,
right.
I think we ended up closing on it. And I didn't have any money at all at this point. Really nothing. And at the time, like I said, I'd gone back to a job at the bank. When I got this apartment, I decided, well, I don't really need the job anymore. There's enough cash flow right here in this apartment right now to survive without a job. So I ended up quitting the job and just working full-time on remodeling that apartment complex. Me and a couple of friends would just go whenever we had time. It was mostly me, but I'd, and have friends come over and, pay them to help me put up sheetrock or, replace carpet, whatever. And we would just get one unit rented out. We'd rent it up, and then we moved to the next one. And just one by one, we turned over all those units that were bad.
Wow. How long did it take you to do that?
It took us a year to get all 12 of them rented to get full occupancy. And now in the meantime, since then, we've remodeled almost every single one. I think we've got 4 left with the original people still in there that we're not going to remodel till they move out.
Right.
But it took a while. Now, in that one, it cost a lot of money. I think we spent probably $60,000 on the rehab for that one. So this goes into how I do this stuff with no money down. And I didn't buy this directly myself. And this is kind of a nice, what would you call it? loops around to a nice ending in that I called up my dad and said, I've got this apartment complex deal I'm putting together right now.
Now, this is the same guy that wanted you to go to law school, right?
Yep, same guy. Yep. I said, I got this amazing deal. Are you interested in being a part of it? I said, I need money for I need the money for the rehab on it, and I don't have it. And he had a line of credit through the bank. He had a $60,000 line of credit. And I said, if you give me access to your line of credit. Now, this, I probably offered him way more than I needed to. But I said, if you give me access to your line of credit of that $60,000, I will give you half of the apartment complex profit someday when we sell it. I still get all the cash. Yeah, I said, I'll get all the cash flow now, because I needed to live. And I'll make the payment on your line of credit. So it doesn't cost him anything other than the fact that now he can't use his line of credit. But he wasn't using it anyway. I said, I'll give you half the profit someday. And the way we negotiated, and then what he basically said was, I don't need half the profit, but what I want you to do is whatever profit we make someday, you take that and you turn it into a bigger profit. And when I die someday, after all this is done, after we keep rehashing that money and recycling it, your siblings and you will split that money. So it's kind of a roundabout way of
That's great.
He's thinking he won't have any he's not going to have a lot of money, to pass on. But this would be his legacy for his kids, was his half in this apartment.
So you got a lot of pressure on you now. I mean, your whole family is counting on you to.
Exactly, my whole family is counting on
Don't blow this one.
So yeah, that
and for the love of God, don't rent to any of your friends.
Never. And again, I did rent to when I first got it.
Unbelievable.
One of the same buddies that rented that other house from me.
And how long is his prison sentence?
Oh, he got out. Yeah, oh man, I feel bad for these people. I mean, they're friends of mine, and they're going through a hard time. They lose their house, and they come ask me for. Again, I don't do it anymore.
Maybe they're not the problem. Maybe you are. Maybe you're anyone that rents from you goes to jail.
That may be the problem. No, this goes back to what I was saying, though, that every problem that real estate investors have comes back to their own fault. I mean, almost entirely across the board. Every problem I've ever had has been something that I've done wrong. It's when I don't listen to my own screening advice, when I have a bad feeling about somebody and I do it anyway, if they don't make quite enough, but I feel bad for them and so I let them in anyway. Those are always the problem tenants, always. Yeah. I mean, last year I had a tenant, one of the worst I've had. I mean, they were a nice family, I thought, but they were in such a hurry to move in. They came in on a U-Haul on a Saturday morning and said, we have nowhere to be. We need to be in this afternoon. And I ended up rushing everything to get them in. I skipped calling their previous landlords. Normally I always call previous landlords. I skipped that part. Ended up, these people were the most high maintenance people I've ever had. I mean, they paid on time technically, but we ended up asking them to leave because, again, with the month-to-month thing, you can do that because they were so high maintenance and so litigious, I guess. Everything that they saw, they were like, well, we're going to sue you if you don't fix this.
Right,
I'm like,
right.
You've got, they saw a little bit of mildew in their bathroom on their shower. Well, that's what happens when you live in the Pacific Northwest and you don't have your, vent fan on. Didn't matter. We're going to sue you if you don't come and wash this off. So, anyway, again, my fault because I didn't call their previous landlords. If I would have totally seen that, they were like that for every one of their landlords, and I wouldn't have rented to them.
Right. Well, let me ask you about the apartment.
Sure.
When you made the decision to buy it, so you buy it for $550.
Yep.
I assume with no money down. They're just going to take back the mortgage.
Yep.
You get your dad to finance the $60,000 for rehab. How did you do the math to determine that this was a deal worth pursuing?
Sure. This kind of goes to a little bit. Now, I didn't know at the time this rule that I'll tell you here in a second. There's something we call the 50% rule. This is what I wish I had done on it. And this is one of the best rules in all of real estate investing. It's just a rule of thumb, so don't put too much stock into it. It's not like this is gospel truth or anything. But generally speaking, when you're looking at larger apartment buildings or just even anything bigger than a single-family house, and some people use this number for single-family houses as too, 50% of whatever comes in is going to go out in expenses, not counting the mortgage. So if you've got a property that rents for a total of $1,000 and your mortgage is $300, you take that $1,000, divide it in half, 50%, and you got $500. You pay your $300 mortgage payment, and whatever's left is what you could anticipate having for cash flow. That is a really good rule of thumb.
And by expenses, I assume you include in that taxes and insurance?
Yep, that includes taxes, insurance.
Which may be rolled into the mortgage payment, depending, so you have to kind of break that out.
Correct, yeah. And some people actually go 60% rule instead of 50% on the much larger apartment complexes, depending on, because you got water and a few other expensive charges. So I've actually found on my apartment it's more like 60%, and I was anticipating 50. So I don't get quite as much cash flow as I thought.
Okay.
But,
so that'd be taxes, insurance, maintenance, vacancy, and as you said, particularly on multi-family units, you may have to pay some of the utilities.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's a spendy one. I mean, I think our water bill every month is $1,700 or $1,800 a month, and it adds up. I mean, quickly. So there's also capital expenditures, which are those things that happen every so often. You know, a new parking lot, a new roof. They don't happen every year. They're not counted as repairs, but they might happen every 5 or 10 years. But you still got to save up for them.
Right.
So that's what the 50% rule kind of accounts for, all those things. So what I usually look at is I usually say, if I use the 50% rule, I want to clear $100 per month per unit on any property I buy. That's my bare minimum. I won't go any lower than that. So if it's a duplex that I'm buying, using the 50% rule, I have to clear at least $200 a month, preferably more. But I have to do that. That's minimum for me. And I guess, I mean, everyone has their own number. I guess it depends on where you live too. Some places people would want no less than 200 per unit. For single family houses, there's no way I would do it for 100 a month. I'd want 200 or more. So
right.
that's how I kind of determine the price. I mean, in a way, back then I didn't really know as much as I know now about multifamilies. So when they told me 550, I said, great. You know, I mean, I didn't really negotiate. I looked at the numbers, but I didn't really think too hard on that.
What do these places rent for? Each apartment? How much?
Yeah, each apartment rents for $550, somewhere in there, for these 2-bedroom apartments. And so it brings in total, I don't know, you're gonna make me do math now, but it was $500 a month times 24 units. That's $12,000 a month. So it brings in roughly that. And again, we paid $550, and we probably got $600 into it total, you know, including the repairs and such. And yeah, so I mean, it definitely meets the $100 per unit. I would love to have more, obviously, but you know, someday if I refinance the property, I might be able to get more, lowering the interest rate. I pay them 7.5%. I could probably get 5% from a bank. But
so why don't you refinance, or is it a matter of qualifying for such a large loan?
It is a matter of qualifying. One, they're going to want to see. Usually, when you refinance, they're going to want to see 6 months of reserves for every property you own, which means I'd have to have, I don't know, $100,000, $200,000 sitting in the bank in order to refinance it. But that kind of defeats the whole purpose of me refinancing it, to lower my payment, because then I'd have to save up so much money anyway that, I mean, anytime I get money, I generally just put it back into something. So
right.
I could probably get away with it anyway, and I'm sure I could find a bank to refinance it, and I probably will. When I signed the mortgage with these people, I only did a 5-year loan with a 5-year renewal on it. And so I've got 6 years left total that I have on this. So I probably should start looking right now before interest rates go up too high.
And just so folks listening understand that, at least if it works the way mine do, when you say a 5-year loan, it's amortizing over how many years?
Over 30 years on mine.
But there's a balloon payment after year 5?
Correct. Yeah.
Right.
After year 5, it's due. But then we put in an automatic extension that basically said as long as they're in good health. I mean, it's kind of a fuzzy line, but because I knew these people, I was okay with that. As long as they're in good health, they just want to make sure that if they needed the money absolutely because they were, you know, in the hospital or in a nursing home, that I could find another way to pay them back. But sounds like they're healthy. So
you're now making, it sounds like I'm gathering, a full-time income in your real estate business.
Correct. Yeah. So I at that point, I quit my job. Never, you know, I was like, oh, I'll never get a job again because I'm making enough from cash flow. And I was really big into, you know, the idea at the time, this is how I looked at real estate. I said, if I can get $100 per month, then how much do I need to retire? I mean, essentially, I need, let's say, how much to be happy? I want $10,000 a month. To be really, you know, successful in life, I want $10,000 a month. So you just break that down, $100 a unit times, you know, would be 100 units would be $10,000 a month. Okay, well, so my job just became attracting units. I mean, I was just a unit collector. And how many can I get? And so, like I said, I'm up to 42 right now. And that's when I finished the apartment. I finished remodeling. I wasn't really flipping more, and I had a lot more free time. So I started a blog, which is no longer, I mean, it's sitting there, but I no longer updated. It was realestateinyour20s.com, where I wanted to teach people how to invest in real estate at a young age. And on that site, I wrote an ebook, and it was called 7 Years to Seven-Figure Wealth. And it was basically kind of my theory on how this is like math. I'm a math nerd. Basically, the idea is if you buy property and you were to take all the cash flow, buy good property, take all the cash flow and save it up, and as soon as you hit a certain amount, like $20,000, you go buy another property. And now you've got 2 properties, and you take all the cash flow from those 2 and save it up, and then you buy another one. And then you sell them all, buy a new one. Anyway, basically the math works out over the course of 7 years, you can end up with like $1.5 million in equity on these properties. It's really incredible the way, what's that? There's linear exponential growth because you're
hockey
recycling.
stick. They call it the hockey stick growth, right?
It's amazing.
So is that book still around? Can folks read it?
It is. Yeah, they can read it. It's on realestateinyour20s.com.
Okay,
just all spelled out. Real Estate in Your 20s. You can download it. However, I've kind of shifted my. That book is what it shifted my theory. Before it was collect 100 units all at $100 a month and I'm retired. Then I started realizing as I was writing this book, I thought, why am I doing this? Why am I living off my cash flow? I mean, that's no different than a business that doesn't invest in itself. A business who just goes out and, every time they make $100, they go and spend $100. Like, you can't grow a business that way unless you're reinvesting in the business. So at that point, I decided, well, I want to take all my cash flow and start recycling it, 100% of it, and start putting it back into buying more properties or paying off the properties, whatever I got to do. So that's when I decided, while I was writing this book is when Josh Dorkin, who's the CEO of Bigger Pockets, he found my blog and said, we'd like to have you come on board over here and do what you're doing on your little site and do it for the big, 150,000 community over here. So that's how I ended up at Bigger Pockets.
When did you join Bigger Pockets?
That would have been December of 2012, so just over a year ago.
You guys do a fantastic job.
Thanks.
For those listening, if you have any interest at all in real estate investing, you got to check out biggerpockets.com. They got a great forum. They've got a fantastic podcast. I was listening, Brandon, to your podcast, and I just started listening, actually. I listened to, I think, episodes 47 and 48. What was the name of the one guy that invests in duplexes out in New Jersey? He was like podcast 48, I think.
I think that was Darren Sager.
Yeah, that really got me motivated. In fact, I called up my friend who invests with me. We haven't bought a property in a while, and I said, we got to get back into this. We've been, this is ridiculous. So
it is a good time right now. I mean, interest rates they're climbing, but they're still low, and the market's heating up, but it's not crazy yet. So, I mean, it's a really good time to buy right now, I think.
Yeah, I wish I could buy. I've convinced myself that buying in Northern Virginia is a bad idea because of the cost, and the rent ratio is really low.
Yep.
So all of the properties in Ohio right now, but there's part of me that really wishes I'd dive into the market here, but I think it's just a little too rich for me.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to say I live here, so it's bad enough that I got to pay the mortgage on the home I live in. So
yeah, and that's where a lot of people say, live where you want, invest where it makes sense.
Yeah,
I'm not quite. I don't invest out of my area because that would freak me out, and someday I will, hopefully. But right now I don't. I don't know. I mean, I think people do find success. I don't think anybody will ever care about your property as much as you do, and so if you're going to do that, I would do what I do is find partners that just like you do. Yeah, you find somebody who maybe it does have boots on the ground there, or who can invest. If you can find something like that, you're much better off. Yeah. And furthermore, I've always believed that generally, and I'd actually like to do some research on this, but there's within any major metropolitan area, within a 2-hour drive, there's low-income places to buy. I mean, for example, Seattle is a crazy market, one of the most expensive markets in the country. And, a house is $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 up in Seattle. I'm an hour and 40 minutes from Seattle, and you can buy a house for $30,000 where I'm at. I mean, so people up in Seattle, people come on Bigger Pockets and they complain, yeah, I'm from Seattle. I don't know how to get into real estate. I don't have the money. And I'm like, we've got a lot of houses for sale down here that all cash flow really well.
Yeah, and that's true in D.C. I mean, within 2 hours, you find much more affordable homes.
Yeah.
Hey, real quick, what are there websites folks can go to if they're interested in buying apartment buildings or multifamily homes? I mean, the websites that cater to that kind of property.
Yeah. So, there's LoopNet is the big one. LoopNet.com. That's the big one. I think they're owned by CoStar, which was the other big one. Unless CoStar, but one of the two bought out the other one. CoStar and LoopNet, they're now one company. They have separate sites, but they're the same company. Those are the two big ones that are really heavy. I like to plug the Bigger Pockets marketplace, but it's not there yet. We have hundreds of deals go through there every month, but not many big apartment complexes.
Okay.
Yeah, for the big stuff. And honestly, what most good investors, like the really successful apartment investors, would say is once the property hits LoopNet, it's too late. It's too late. Now, one of the best suggestions I've ever heard, I heard a guy say this a while ago on one of our podcasts. I don't remember who it was, but he said, one of the best ways to buy apartment complexes or just rental property in general is monitor the eviction reports for a certain area. Like, let's say you want to buy a multifamily, in, I don't know, Ohio. Monitor the eviction because it's all public information. Because when you're going through an eviction, I mean, you haven't been through one yet. I've been through one. It was on a property we inherited, a tenant we inherited when we bought the property, and it was a terrible eviction. During that process, I was so emotionally drained that if somebody came and offered me some ridiculously low offer on my property, I probably would have considered. I mean, I would have at least entertained it and considered it, because there's just something about when a tenant is trashing your unit and you can't do anything about it that is just so over the top. You just want to get out. And if somebody comes in and offers you a way out, you'll take it. So if you want to buy just monitor that. Look for the apartment buildings, the people that are going through eviction and not asked to buy their property.
Okay, that's a good
you
tip.
You probably get a good percentage of people that would at least have that conversation.
Right.
So.
Well, hey, before I let you go, you mentioned you read a lot. So for those just sort of starting out and interested in investing in real estate, what books would you recommend that they read?
Sure. So, the granddaddy of all real estate books, like at least over the past 20 years, has been Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It's not actually about real estate, but he's a real estate investor. It's just about wealth and building wealth. Rich Dad, Poor Dad, the organization, I mean, there's a lot of maybe controversy about that. I mean, they're a big sales company now, and they've got a lot of expensive products. But the book itself is fundamental to, I think, understanding how to build wealth with real estate. So Rich Dad, Poor Dad, definitely. If you're interested in small multifamilies, there's a book by Larry Loftus called Investing in Duplexes, Triplexes, and Quads. Excellent, excellent book. It was one of the early ones that I read that made me really fascinated with that idea of, his theory, he's buy a duplex or a triplex or a quad, live in it for 2 years or whatever, move to another one.
Right.
And over 10 years, you could acquire, he's got like $1 million in net worth you can acquire over 10 years. It's just a very simple plan for building wealth through those. So,
okay.
Yeah, and then again, there's the Ken McElroy books I mentioned earlier, the ABCs and the Advanced Guide to Real Estate Investing. Those are more about apartment complexes. So, that's kind of a good... Oh, and one last one. Gary Keller wrote a book called The Millionaire Real Estate Investor. And although that's not one of my favorite, it's a good book, but everybody seems to love that book tremendously a lot. So I only read it like a year ago, so maybe it just felt too basic for me. But anybody starting out, I think it's probably an amazing, amazing book.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty sure I've read that book. Isn't that the one where he sort of projects out how much you can have if you buy a property and you keep?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. I'll leave links to all of those books. I appreciate that. I'll leave links to all of those in the show notes. So what's next for you in real estate? You've got 42 units. That's got to be a lot to manage.
It is a lot.
Are you still going to shoot for 100, or what's the goal?
I still do have that goal of at least 100. Technically, I could probably do nothing but work at McDonald's for the rest of my life, and I'd probably be okay in 30 years from now. Once the mortgages are paid off, I'll be okay for retirement. But again, there's a quote from Donald Trump, and that said, "Money is just the what was it? Money is just a scorecard," which I thought was interesting. So, kind of real estate's kind of that now, I guess a bit. So, it's kind of like, can I get 100 just because that's a game? This is a gigantic game that we all play, and so I would like to see 100. I think I'll probably not buy many more single-family houses, if any, ever again, just because the amount of work. And this is a quote I heard Ken McElroy say. We have a podcast coming up. We interviewed him, the guy who wrote the ABCs of real estate investing. And he basically said, and he said it in his books too, it takes as much work to buy a 100-unit property as it does to buy a single-family property. So why focus on the single families? And so that's kind of where I think I'm headed is more of the larger, 100, 200, 300-unit properties, and building more syndications, getting, guys like you, me, and Josh Dorkin together, and we'll go out and buy a 100-unit property. Like that I think sounds just cool.
Right. Well, the thing I love about your story is you basically started with nothing.
Yeah.
And, so many, I get emails from a lot of people that, are struggling financially. And, a story about someone who, whatever, had rich parents and, got some huge head start, they just don't find helpful. But in your case, you had some help from your father, but basically you went out there, took some risks, a lot of hard work, rehabbed the properties yourself, lived in the back apartment while someone lived in the nicer front area of the property. They went to jail, but then you got a good tenant, and that's the kind of story that people can relate to. And I really appreciate you taking the time to share that with us.
Yeah. No, I'm happy to do it. I'll leave you with one quote from Rich Dad Poor Dad, which is that book I said everyone should read. And it was, poor people say I can't afford it, and rich people ask, how can I afford it? And so that's true with real estate. That's true with anything in life. But if you just shut down your brain and say, I can't afford it because I have no money, that's when you won't be able to afford it, because you just can't. Once you tell yourself that, it's impossible. But if you ask that question, how can I? That's when creative real estate investing comes out, and that's the funnest. And that's when this game gets really fun, is when you're trying to figure out, how do I buy this with no money down? How do I put this deal together, this puzzle, and make it happen? And when you have that mindset, amazing things can happen.
Yeah, well, and you're living proof.
Well, thanks.
Well, listen, Brandon, I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, no, I'm glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the interview with Brandon. Hope you found it informative. I certainly did. I don't know that I've mentioned this, but I've been investing in real estate myself for, let's see here. I guess it's been 9 years now. I have my best friend from high school. At one point we owned 5 single-family homes together in Ohio. We've since sold one, so now we own 4. They're all HUD foreclosures. A lot of experience with HUD foreclosures, rehabbing them, finding tenants, dealing with tenants that maybe don't pay and that sort of thing. Fortunately, we've had good success with most of our tenants. And it's been a lot of fun, and it's been very rewarding. And I think in an upcoming podcast, after this 31-day money challenge, I'll walk through my experience with investing in real estate. Not quite as robust as Brandon's. He's hitting it out of the park. And as I mentioned at the start of the show, biggerpockets.com is an excellent resource. I mean, I can't think of a question I have about investing in real estate where I couldn't find an answer, and great resources and great information at biggerpockets.com. They have an excellent and very robust forum. If you have any interest at all in investing in real estate, I highly recommend that website. I think it's a great resource, and a big thank you to Brandon for taking the time to come on the show today. So with that, we bring the show to a close. As always, you can find the show notes to this episode at DoughRoller.net/podcast 30. I'll include links to all the resources that Brandon mentioned during the interview. Feel free to email me, as always, at dr@DoughRoller.net. Love to hear from you. You can leave a voicemail at speakpipe.com/DoughRoller. Let me know your question. I'll play it on the air. If you haven't already, you can subscribe to this podcast at DoughRoller.net/iTunes. That will redirect you to the iTunes page where this podcast resides. You can subscribe and leave a review. Always appreciate the reviews, both the good and the bad. Helps me make the show a little bit better. And lastly, if you haven't already, please subscribe to our newsletter, DoughRoller.net/newsletter. Just takes a couple of seconds. The newsletter is free. I send it out every Saturday, packed full of resources and tips to help you make the most of your money. So until next time, remember, the best thing money can buy is financial freedom.